The Road to Autonomy is presented by the Road to Autonomy Index. The Road to Autonomy Index is a rules-based equity benchmark index that measures the performance of a basket of global companies that are involved in the development and commercialization of autonomy. Institutional investors and fund managers are watching megatrends that are shaping investment opportunities today. These megatrends are creating thematic investment ideas and opportunities for forward-thinking investors. We believe that one of the biggest megatrends today is autonomy. That's why we created the Road to Autonomy Index, the world's first and only pure-play index to track the thematic investment opportunity in autonomy. Follow the Road to Autonomy Index on your favorite finance app by simply typing in the ticker Autonomy. To learn more about the Road to Autonomy Index, visit roadtoautonomy.com/index. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome Sterling Anderson, co-founder and Chief Product Officer, Aurora. Sterling, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Grayson. It's good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here because I'm really excited for you to tell the Aurora story. The Aurora story is positive. It's resonating with investors. It's resonating with the technology community. Before we get into the business of Aurora, Sterling, why did yourself, Chris, and Drew come together to form Aurora in 2016?
When we came together, we saw an opportunity for an independent company to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. And it's no accident that became our mission statement. We saw a lot of players in the ecosystem at the time struggling to figure out the right path. A credible independent player, in our view, could change the game for them and unlock the potential of a powerful ecosystem of from OEMs to carriers to private fleets to even tier ones and companies who provide some of the backend service, that we felt like a credible autonomy player who played our position and enabled or unlocked the rest of the industry could deliver tremendous value here. And we didn't see much of that at the time. The other thing that we saw was, or didn't see rather, is a credible technical path to safe operation of combination trucks at highway speeds. And we saw an opportunity to address this by creating not just a world-class technology stack that included, in particular and importantly, some of the sensory hardware that was required to do that, but also an ecosystem, as I said, in which the industry heavyweights could each play their respective role in facilitating something much bigger than what any one of us could do alone.
How important it was for you to be independent? Was that the lifeblood that allowed you to do what you thought you had to do?
Well, I'll say lifeblood. There were a lot of factors, obviously, that we recognized had to come together, had to be true for this to be successful. Independence was one of those. And the value of independence, in our view, was a couple-fold. First, not being independent would have meant being owned typically by one of the several players involved in the industry. Being owned by a car company that's focused on passenger vehicles means you're not doing trucks, which in our view is wrong. Being owned by a trucking company meant that ultimately you wouldn't be able to scale your solution into cars, which we thought was also wasteful for reasons we can get into. And similarly with a variety of other players, that independence was freeing in a way. It allowed us to build kind of industry-wide solution that would ultimately unlock potential for much more than just whoever the kind of captive owner of Aurora was.
Is the plan, and you call it the Aurora Driver or Aurora Horizon, is the plan to be able to go across multiple use cases as society evolves or technology changes, or perhaps an OEM comes with a new platform, you could port your driver or teach your driver how to operate that platform? Is that where the vision is?
It is, but notably it's sequenced in a way I'm not sure everyone has quite appreciated. So when we started the company, the original product roadmap that I laid out had us looking at three different segments in particular. One was trucking, one was ride-hailing, and one was local goods delivery. Among those three, it was very clear that at the time, obviously, the trucking industry was both the largest, but also the most opportune in terms of the value proposition of autonomy, given what we can unlock. And this is specifically, as you well know, not just a cost abatement play in trucking. It wasn't just displacing kind of the cost of a human driver. It was unlocking a potential tripling of the return on asset for that truck, given that we could operate near round the clock. It was a provision of a set of services that are enormously valuable to a carrier, to a private fleet who's operating these assets. And so trucking was top of the list in terms of the first product that we wanted to go to market with. The challenge at the time, and again, this is 2016, 2017, is no one in the industry had a credible argument for a technology stack that could safely move these trucks at highway speeds. And to get into that a little bit, nobody could see with more than just one sensor modality, specifically cameras, further than on the order of 200, 250 meters to objects of reasonable reflectivity that you see on the roadway. And the problem with that is I live here in California. In California, fog that limits your visibility to only 200 meters is classified as limited visibility. You would be crazy to drive your car at 75 miles an hour into that. But that's exactly what those who argued that they would be driving trucks with conventional LiDAR would be doing. They're driving an 80,000 pound asset at 75 miles an hour into the equivalent of a dense fog. The only sensor modality that could see past it being a camera, which, as you, I expect, well know, infers the range to targets, doesn't directly measure it, and has a number of challenges that we can get into. And so for us, then, we were stuck with this product roadmap that made it very clear that trucking was the most opportune starting point, and yet a technology space that didn't yet allow for it in a safer, credible way. And so what we did is we started with our public conversation being about the ride-hailing product, which would come, but until and unless we could unlock technically the solution that would allow trucking to be safe and scalable, we weren't going to talk about that publicly. Behind the scenes, we actually started having conversations that are not well known in the industry, but if you piece this together, you'll see evidence of what was happening. One of those was we kicked off a diligent search for the fundamental technology that would allow us to see at longer ranges with LiDAR. We bought a company called Blackmore, based in Bozeman, Montana, that had been for 15 years pioneering a fundamentally new approach to the modulation of light that allow us to see nearly double the range of conventional LiDAR with interference immunity to things like solar load and xenon headlights that traditional LiDAR are subject to, instantaneous Doppler. At the same time, we were quietly engaging in a partnership with Volvo trucks. So this is way back in 2018. We actually, one of the first platforms we integrated our self-driving system with was a Volvo truck. And Lars Stenquist, CTO of Volvo Trucks, and his leadership team, we spent a lot of time with developing this. Actually, we went out to a track to do a bunch of the testing, development, demonstration of the self-driving system operating these trucks so that we could align on the requirements for a partnership going forward on what would be required. And so a lot of the foundational groundwork from the acquisition of Blackmore, the development of First Light, to early groundwork we were laying behind the scenes with truck OEMs to include Volvo and subsequently PACCAR, we're laying the foundation so that ultimately I don't remember if it was maybe January 2021 or something, we ultimately were able to say publicly, look, all the pieces are in place. Trucking is the first product. Ride-hailing will follow when we get to it, but trucking is what we'll launch with.
I'll just summarize with this. Thank you for clarifying that, because there's been a lot of misconceptions, and you heard of more than I have. But Aurora pivoted. They see the economics there. But what you're clearly saying that you were just diligently working behind the scenes on this, and at that time you were private and you had the ability to work behind the scenes. When you went public with Volvo, you went public with PACCAR. Is that when you felt right? You had the right ingredients to make the Aurora truck? Is that why you did it at that point?
Yeah, that's right. And to be fair, pivot, I don't know how well-defined the word pivot is. You could call it a pivot in the sense that until we had a solution that worked for trucks, it wasn't going to be our primary path. But our intention was to identify and build that solution. Once we had it, this was a really important element of what was happening in 2020. Both PACCAR and Volvo trucks were working on their respective path into this market that was looking more and more imminent. In PACCAR's case, they had become effectively the de facto development platform for a lot of the industry, right? You look around the industry and everybody's operating on a Peterbilt 579. This was, but PACCAR realized they needed to initiate a program that would actually develop a scalable, productionizable, what they called autonomy-enabled truck platform. And they needed partnerships to do this. At the time, as they diligenced the field, it was Aurora that stood out as the partner with whom to partner, that understood the requirements of the platform, had a credible path to market with it. At the same time, Volvo had done a tremendous amount of work in, as we were discussing earlier, setting up Volvo Autonomous Solutions, right? The first new business unit for a long time for that company, specifically focused on delivering the value of autonomy, which was an incredibly opportune moment for our partnership, where along with Nils and the Volvo Autonomous Solutions Group, it was effectively a marriage of highly complementary things. our core technology and his business approach and path to commercializing the solution in on-road applications in North America.
As you scale the Aurora trucking business, do you need a third OEM to round it out, or are you going to be able to scale a business to where you want with your two OEM partners in PACCAR and Volvo?
There's a lot of opportunity. So between Volvo and PACCAR alone, they command on the order of 50% of the U.S. trucking market. So their penetration with customers, their credibility in the marketplace is very strong. So we see a lot of opportunity to grow that with them. From a need perspective, I don't think there's a need to do this. Notably, the Aurora Driver is designed to integrate with various makes and models, not just makes, but also models of vehicle. So at some point, if anything changes, obviously we would bring online other platforms as well. But right now, Volvo Autonomous Solutions and PACCAR are our focus.
You mentioned local goods deliveries. Some of those deliveries are done in Class 6 vehicles as well, produce markets. My father was a produce broker, so I'm very familiar with a Class 6 vehicle. In theory, can the Aurora Driver work on a Class 6 vehicle?
Yes.
Then you have the middle mile there. So that's a whole new opportunity potentially for the company. You could potentially be working on it behind the scenes.
We could be. The couple of things that are really important to understand about a self-driving solution is if architected right, integration with the vehicle is not the biggest challenge. For self-driving, the biggest challenge tends to be perceiving the world around you and accurately predicting how it's going to evolve. And that's vehicle agnostic. When you share the roadways between multiple different vehicle classes, you have to have developed an extremely robust perception system, prediction system, motion planning system that can take all of the information that's being provided by your sensors and make sense of the world. Once you've made sense of the world, if you have an accurate prediction of how it's about to evolve, your determination of the specific control inputs that you need to use for a large combination truck pulling a 53-foot drive van versus a Class 6 truck or whatever is fairly, I don't mean to trivialize it, but I'm going to use the word trivial because that is a very well understood problem. If you've got a path and you simply need to track that path, the kinodynamics of whatever vehicle you're driving are well understood and just involves controls work that's existed for technically centuries.
When you achieve that, you can scale, and then for me being me, you can operate a business. What is the Aurora trucking business model going forward?
We are launching our trucking business model in phases. The first phase of that is what we call transportation as a service. It's effectively a solution that allows, call it a try before you buy, if you will, for our major customers. It allows us to dog food with them and be highly involved in the asset management, in the deployment, in the dispatch of these assets to ensure that it's delivering the value that each of our partners needs for their respective businesses. And we're actually in the pilot phase of that with quite a few customers right now. That transitions within the first couple of years into what we call driver as a service. This is a model where we are licensing the self-driving system, inclusive of the hardware, the software, and the data services required to operate it to our customers who are in turn purchasing either the truck from the OEM who provides it or purchasing a set of solutions, as in Volvo's case, from them to deliver value on their network.
So transport as a service, is that what you're very public with FedEx and the FedEx team? They listen, and I've met with them privately. They say a lot of the nice things about Aurora privately. Is that transport as a service with them? Is that what you're doing with FedEx today?
Yeah, today, technically, the trucks are owned by Aurora, right? So that's going to mean it's effectively a purchase transport solution. But all of the work that we're doing together is in service of an anticipated future state where they're owning and operating those assets. And so the partnership involves FedEx personnel or other customers spending time with our team in the weeds of the performance, in the weeds of the operations, highly involved in the handoffs that are happening, for instance, at terminals, to make sure that this is something that is prepared for their business. We also, on the planning side, spend a lot of time with each of these customers on their subsequent kind of route introduction, expansion expectations. So as they look at that, typically it's in service of the owned fleet and the lane networks that they expect to operate with their own trucks. because that is the ultimate expectation for this asset shows up.
As you scale up to driver as a service licensing business, I'm a huge fan of the licensing business. I think one of the world's greatest licensing models, not executed well now, is Disney. Everybody they go to Disney, you want your Mickey Mouse, you want your Goofy, and it works. And so your kids have kids and it keeps going on, and Mickey Mouse keeps selling lots of different things. When you operate driver as a service, let's just say I'm Acme Trucking, I'm a Volvo customer, I call Nils, I'd like to get the Volvo truck with the Aurora hardware, and then I pay you a licensing fee. Is that how that's going to work, or to design a custom package? If you could shed some light, that'd be great.
Typically, so take the FedEx case for a moment, and this is something that we've been very public about. It's effectively a three-way conversation. One in which a FedEx will, with PACCAR, negotiate in terms of kind of the purchase of the assets of the trucks, and then with us on the licensing of the driver. And then between Aurora and PACCAR, we're working on the platform and its performance characteristics. So it's effectively a three-way kind of relationship in those cases. In Volvo's case, Volvo works with the customer through Volvo Autonomous Solutions, brings them online to their business. Behind the scenes, the relationship is between us and Volvo, Aurora and Volvo. So we provide the self-driving solution for Volvo. They are effectively Aurora's ultimate customer in that case, and then they work with their respective customers across the industry.
You're not stepping on toes. That's a wise decision there. What do the economics of the model look like? Just is there a recurring fee that's paid to you, or what does that look like?
It's a per utilization subscription service. So with the Aurora Driver, you can think of this as per mile. That's where we're adding the value. Aligning incentives between all parties involved is a really important part of what we're doing. And we've talked a lot about what we're doing in concert with OEMs and customers. One of the other critical aspects of this, that in service of getting unit economics to a place where these businesses work, is the self-driving hardware itself. And to date, we've seen those costs across the industry are very high. The path to large-scale production is not clear. And this is something that we also wanted to remedy. And so we've been working also behind the scenes for some time to develop a partnership that would allow us to produce these at very high volumes and very low costs to unlock that value proposition fully. And that's something that we announced just a few months ago, actually, with Continental, an exclusive partnership wherein Continental is actually providing this hardware, the full kind of self-driving hardware suite, for integration with the truck platform at the OEM's facility and ultimately delivery to the customer on also a utilization basis. So effectively, Continental has priced their hardware on a per mile basis to Aurora, and that allows for this high alignment of incentives between every single party in that chain. The end customer cares about the return on their assets. They care about its high utilization. They care about the productivity that they can get out of it. The OEM is incentivized to care about the productivity this asset can drive. Even the supplier is not just kind of taking their lump sum upfront cost of the hardware and walking away. They're actually servicing and ensuring that the uptime of the asset is as high as possible, because that's how they get paid as well. So it's a really elegant incentive alignment mechanism that I think our business model has allowed, that throughout the chain, I think it aligns everybody.
The incentives are aligned. It seems to me that Aurora's going to be a software company. You're going to be focused on creating the Aurora Driver. From a hardware product perspective, do you have input on the design of the hardware, or are you leaving that to your partner Continental and to your OEM partners?
We should talk about which elements of the design we're discussing, right? There's the base truck platform that is owned by the OEM, and Aurora is effectively advising on that design. So obviously, when it comes to things like redundancies, latency expectations, communications that happen between the self-driving system and the base truck platform, safety case, comprehensive of both, these are highly involved conversations, right? And they're conversations that are so involved that it gives me pause to hear any stories about going to market that didn't include this kind of engagement. Because delivering a safe self-driving system that is robust, that is scalable, that is profitable, requires this kind of engagement, which is exactly why we do it with the OEMs. So that's kind of where the design lives there. I'll say that we actually have industrial design team that actually works with the OEM on things like the aesthetics and the integration with the base truck platform and the aero implications. Obviously, a little less important for trucks than it is for cars, but still matters, particularly when it comes to things like aero and efficiency implications. As it relates to design of the core self-driving hardware, This is, again, where the core technology that goes into this has all been designed by Aurora, whether it's the computer, whether it's the first light LiDAR, whether it is other elements from anything from the network switch to the power infrastructure to the thermal and cooling approach that we take. This has all been designed by Aurora. As with many tier one supplier agreements, typically Continental, where they shine, is in taking that core technology, that core IP, and then helping refine that into a package that can be productionized at large scales and low costs.
From the truck design standpoint, will your team work with your OEM partners to fully integrate it where it's flush, it looks really pretty? Because some of the early days, let's go back 2-3 years ago, yourself and your competitors bolted on. Will you eventually work where it's just completely flush into the truck design?
Our sensors actually are integrated more and more today. What I'll note is a distinction that I want to call out between when we say things like flush, I hear, effectively invisible or kind of something like what I did with my team at my last place, where we try to make it kind of aesthetically beautiful. I don't know that we'll ever get to a state where you just won't see anything. And the reason for that is fields of view matter. Range of sensing and detection matter. And so for these trucks, one of the things that is really important is the placement of those sensors relative to the world that you need to see is critical to what you're doing. I love the story of modularity. I love the story of simplicity. I love the story of like, hey, there's basically, 2 modules and that's it. The challenge is if you look at the actual requirements for what you need to see and where you need to see it, that sets some pretty hard constraints on where you place those sensors. And it's not an accident. I would simplify to as few modules as possible as well if I didn't have a constraint of we actually have to be able to see over the car immediately ahead of us. We have to be high to be able to do that. We have to be able to see in the near field near the truck. We have to therefore have modules that allow us to do that with sensors that have fields of view that enable it. And so at the end of the day, it's this combination of subject to the constraints of the problem space, how beautiful can you make it? And quite frankly, this is a little different than it used to be in my last place, but my priority, our priority in what we do is not beauty, then function. It's function/safety, then it's cost / kind of integration, and then it's impact in terms of things like efficiency, aero efficiency and drag, and then finally it's beauty. So if we can make these beautiful, and I think you'll see one of the things that we've just actually completed, our trucks are actually starting to roll out with the aesthetic covers, which is a massive improvement to the way they looked previously. But at the end of the day, while we'd really like these to look beautiful, we want them to be first and foremost functional, safe, cost-effective, and highly efficient from an aero perspective.
And what role does maintenance play in that? So you have an individual, an Aurora employee, or perhaps you contract with a Ryder or a Penske or a Rush when they have to fix or update your truck. Do they have a manual, or how do they know what to do? Do you design to make it easy for your maintenance team to operate?
So designed for reliability and designed for serviceability is super, super important. And so one of the other things is, I mentioned we simplify it as much as possible into these modules. One of the things that allows is we refer to them internally as the horns. So if you look at these trucks, they'll have a couple of horns on the top. Each of these is a single integrated module. What that does is that allows for us, when we get into the high volume manufacturing, to effectively ship those to the OEM from Continental, effectively prepackaged and even pre-calibrated. So all of the intrinsic calibration between all those sensors, cameras, radar, LiDAR that are all in that module has been done. Extrinsic calibration in a relative sense has also been done, such that the only remaining calibration step is to get one more data point as it relates to the extrinsic calibration of the module relative to the vehicle itself once it's bolted on. So effectively, think of this as you've got a couple of interconnects for the cooling solution, for the power solution, for the data, and for the mechanical just attachment of that pod to the truck. And then you've got a ready-made kind of effectively facility for receiving it. So at production time, these get line-sided, they get put on the truck, rapidly calibrated, and then it's ready to go out the door. And from a servicing standpoint, the same is true. Where effectively, if you've got a camera that gets hit by a rock or you've got some other issue that's popped up, the fastest way to get that truck back on the road is to take an entire module and just swap them out. And we'll take the other one back and reman it or root cause what's going on and fix it. But that allows for, again, high uptime of the asset, which is one of our critical metrics.
You're limiting the downtime. That's what your partners want. They want efficiency and uptime. You can have the world's greatest driver, but if you don't have the efficiency or uptime, you get a very angry phone call that you don't want to be on the receiving end of that. You have the components of something special is how I would summarize it. And then you're very public that you're preparing for driver out operations in 2024 from Dallas to Houston. How are you preparing for that?
One of the things that we've also emphasized publicly is that the core enabler to doing that is the safety case. This is something that we were alone in the industry years ago in first publishing actually the safety case. You can go online today to our website to see how this structured argument comes together to establish the system is safe enough to operate without a human as a fallback behind the wheel. That is one, and we're tracking in our public roadmap how we're doing on that. So every quarter, we have targets internally that are set for the team around safety. Now, we augment those with performance targets as well, because safety is not the only thing. It is a hard constraint. It is the single most important thing to unlocking the ability to actually do this on the road. But if you've got a safe product, that doesn't mean you've got a productive one. That doesn't mean you've got a cost-effective one. And we're highly conscious of this. And so internally, we track a number of other metrics as it relates to the reliability and the productivity of that truck. Everything from, some of the words that we've used quite a few times now so far in this conversation, things from uptime expectations to acceptance rate, cancellation rate, on-time delivery performance expectations, net of any delays that might have been incurred because the dispatch took longer than it should have because we were checking out too many things in terms of the autonomy readiness. Again, prioritizing these metrics that our customers care intensely about so that we can very transparently with them in our collaborations today say, look, this is where we are. And in a similar way, right, our public roadmap that lays out this glide path on several different vectors for us to get to launch of our product, internally and with our customers, we have an even more granular view of that. And so every time we sit down with a FedEx, with a Werner, with a Schneider, or Uber Freight or other customers, we actually go through and say, here's where we are relative to that glide path so that they are comfortable when this starts to phase into the network and they actually start to buy the assets themselves or license from Volvo Autonomous Solutions, they're comfortable with the performance characteristic as well as its safety.
Where does the focus on cost efficiency come from? You've alluded to it several times during this conversation. To me, it seems like it's, from what you're describing as part of your DNA, it's very smart. Where does that come from?
As in what motivates it?
Yes, because a lot of your peers aren't focused on cost efficiency or economics or running a business. You have some of your peers that are focused on, we're going to build the world's greatest product. And what you're sitting here and telling me, we're focused on the economics, we're focused on the cost efficiency. Your investors it's resonating with your investors. You had the $820 million raised recently from T. Rowe Price, which led with 125. So it's resonating with tier one AAA Wall Street houses. But where in the Aurora DNA does it come from?
Yeah, I want to make sure that this doesn't get interpreted as Aurora cares about cost and not building the world's best product. In my view, the world's best product is also a very profitable product. You can slap a lot of technology onto something and call it extraordinary with your R&D hat on, and it may not make any difference in the world at all because nobody's going to use it. Nobody's going to adopt it. And so in my view, the world's best product comes down to our mission statement. It's a product that delivers the benefits of self-driving technology as safely, as quickly, and as broadly as possible. And by broadly, I mean high degrees of scale. I mean the ability to integrate into networks that are not losing money on every mile that they drive. Right? That's just not a business, not a product. That's where a lot of that comes from. Again, clear priority sequencing. It must be safe. That's non-negotiable. It must be productive, but part of that productivity really comes down to the net cost implication of the product.
I'm going to summarize this way. You want to be the iPhone of trucking, beautiful product, highly efficient, highly profitable, 40% plus margins, and it has safety features in it with crash detection. So does Aurora want to be the iPhone of autonomous trucking?
Sure. I want to make sure that we're crisp on one thing, because the iPhone of is a trope that I find abused in many cases by those who would justify levels of vertical integration that just aren't justified. In this case, for instance, I look at what Apple's done with the iPhone. I see high degree of control that Apple has vertically integrated throughout the internals of the phone itself. Everything from even the chip to many other elements of that phone are deeply, deeply controlled by Apple. The ecosystem they've built around it is specifically built to facilitate the variety of players participating with this product. Those things are at the heart of what we've tried to do with our product. Notably, though, Apple doesn't have to be the ones who build the case for all the iPhones, nor do we believe that we need to be the ones who build the vehicle platform or the many different elements that will make our product successful. Indeed, it would be, frankly, fairly hubristic of us to think that we could go out and compete with OEMs that have existed for 100 years and dialed in their processes to be able to do this at large scales and low costs. And so that was a key element of our decision early on to say, look, we ultimately are going to provide a driver as a service. It's a subscription-based platform. We're going to do what we do best, and we're going to build, like Apple did, an ecosystem that allows for the integration and profitable or productive participation of everyone from OEMs to tier one suppliers like Continental to customers and customers like many of the ones that we've mentioned.
You combine it with the App Store because you can build wonderful things on there and it becomes a platform. What you're describing, I'll just summarize this way, has been very insightful. There's no other way to describe what you're pulling back the curtain on the Aurora business. And I thank you for your transparency and your honesty. I find it, again, extremely insightful. When you launched Driver Out Dallas to Houston, how many trucks are you initially planning to operate?
Yeah, our initial, we're working towards commercial launch without safety drivers end of next year. And we're looking to do that on up to about 20 trucks initially. So we'll start small. That's deliberate. We want to make sure that it is highly kind of ironed out. We'll work through that, as I said, that task model initially. So those first 20 trucks will not be owned and operated by the end customer yet. But in 2025, 2026, we'll start to phase over. Those customers will begin preparations for the ownership and management of the assets themselves. And 25, 26, we expect to launch our driver as a service business.
25, 26, it's a big year for you. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a big year. And we'll have you back on then to tell us where the business is at that point. You're getting ready for 24. Why Dallas to Houston? Was it the best from a technical standpoint, the best from an economic standpoint, or what was it?
Dallas-Houston is one of the heaviest freight corridors in the country. If I remember right, I think some of the industry statistics had it just point to point between those markets on the order of 2,500 loads a day, something on that order. So that I-45 corridor is super dense. But the other thing that it is relatively short. And you might ask, well, Sterling, like you were just talking about the value proposition of these trucks being on long lanes where they can exceed the 11 hours of service. And yes, absolutely. But what this does as a launch lane is it allows very quick turnaround of the data. And so because we're piloting on that, that means that we're going max 3 hours between data dumps on what we just learned, what we just developed. And so we also drive today between Fort Worth and El Paso, but there, obviously, you're talking 10-ish plus hours before you're able to actually offload the data, get a sense for what happened, and kind of iterate. And so from an iteration cycle speed perspective, Dallas-Houston was really opportune to start out with. It's also a really dense freight line and makes a lot of sense for several of our customers. But we will, shortly after the launch of Dallas-Houston, we'll actually launch on Fort Worth, El Paso. And then we'll extend that to Phoenix. We'll extend it into the southeastern corridor, and we'll expand along the Sun Belt, largely because of a combination of high freight density in that Sun Belt, high degree of overlap with what our customers' businesses need, longer lanes typically, and those longer lanes obviously tend to unlock some of the value proposition we talked about. And then finally, very regulatory environment that is highly conducive.
As you expand to the southeast, will you look into ports, particularly the Port of Savannah? It's one of the fastest growing ports in the United States in terms of freight volume in and out of the port.
We see ingress points. The Port of Savannah is one of them. Places like Laredo, Texas, are another one, where effectively a lot of the nearshoring activity that's happening is effectively creating a high demand for kind of incoming freight from these locations. And not only that, but there is a natural consolidation of those goods in a way that actually enhances the uptime of the truck. So instead of having to drive to any of a variety of small yards that are doing 1-2 loads a day, being able to pull up to large parking lot, so to speak, in Laredo or at one of these ports and be able to just grab a trailer, turn around and head out will be valuable for the business.
It's valuable for the business. It's also real estate light. When you're today, where you're doing your Dallas to Houston, you mentioned the data offload. Are you going to own and operate a terminal on each end, and on the backside, I have to be me being me? Was there access to a lot of dark fiber in the ground of why you chose those locations so you can get the data quickly?
We actually ended up putting some fiber in the ground, technically out in the middle of Palmer, Texas, for instance. But no, from the standpoint of terminal ownership, operating and operations and strategy, our initial launch lanes, we needed tight control so that we could refine the processes. We optimized the design of the terminal. We spent a lot of cycles on exactly how the flow is going to work through them so we can be as efficient as possible and just kind of turn those trailers as rapidly as we can. We spent a lot of cycles, frankly, on the exact location of those terminals relative to points of demand in each of those markets. That changes in time, right? So that ownership and the operations of those terminals won't likely remain Aurora near future. It was required for us to get it up and started. Once this model is proven out, with the design optimized, and I think we've been public about our Dallas terminal and our Houston terminal both being commercially ready at this point. With that proven out, we expect to be able to take that blueprint and go to third parties who can then implement it on our behalf in locations around the country.
Simplify it. You send off a CAD drawing, and this is what our terminal needs to look like. From a design perspective, do you have to separate, because some of these terminals will have human-driven trucks and they'll have the Aurora trucks. Do you have to separate them, or are your Aurora trucks interacting with the traditional human-driven trucks?
Yeah, the interactions are controlled, right, in the sense that the Aurora-driven trucks, we'd like to have launching and landing zones that are effectively, we don't want them to have to be interacting a ton with other trucks or people milling around, things like that. Not because it wouldn't be safe, but because it's just more to deal with in the early days. So, and the flows, effectively, what ends up happening is you have a kind of dedicated ingress point for those human drivers, shuttle drivers bringing the trailers. They drop those trailers at a particular location. Aurora trucks are hooked up to them, drive through a particular route and head out. That's how that works today. I should note, lest it be perceived that these self-driving systems are always and forever going to be so brittle that they A, need terminals and can't just kind of drive to the customer's end location, or B, need highly constrained or dedicated set of things like launch and land zones. That's not the case. In fact, what we're looking at with some of our early customers, and certainly where we'll evolve, is we will be pulling loads end to end. That shuttle operation is costly. It's costly in terms of time and money. And we appreciate that. And this is effectively an entry point. It actually makes sense that those unit economics solve for very long lanes. They are pretty challenged for short lanes like Dallas, Houston. And so long term, we expect to start to move goods between customer locations directly as our network becomes more and more capillary. And we're taking that in a fairly surgical way, where we're looking at effectively the ROI, the return on the investment, for every endpoint location we could go to. Typically today, that ROI is very high for something like a terminal, because the volume is kind of the return, the volume of loads that we can pull out of it. The investment is effectively the number and complexity of the endpoints we have to deal with to get that return. When you're driving onesie-twosies between Bob's Tire Shop and some other place, the ROI is pretty low. If you're driving between FedEx sortation facilities that are just churning out a lot of loads per day, the ROI there is pretty high. And so particularly as it relates to those who have natural consolidation points in their networks, LTLs is a big one that tends to have these things. Private fleets tend to have these things. That's probably where you'll see that endpoint-to-endpoint operations start. But then over time, we'll be doing more and more of it, even with FTL customers, each of whose end customers, the shippers, have facilities that may have lesser volume and more complexity. But at some point, we'll get to that point in the curve where it makes sense.
There's more efficiency. Let's put this into trucker term. Eventually, at some point, I'm not asking for a timeline, at some point in the future, the Aurora driver will go dock to dock.
That's right. Now, notably, I don't know how likely it is that customers are going to... So dock to dock technically means you're backing up to a loading dock and you're live loading. Live loading typically takes time. I don't know that customers are going to want these assets sitting around while a trailer is being loaded. So I expect that even when you're moving, I'll call it endpoint to endpoint or warehouse to warehouse, let's say. When you're doing that, I expect that most customers will be best served if they do this in a drop and hook type capacity, or effectively instead of backing up technically to the dock, it's showing up with a preloaded trailer and then is taking it and running with it. But yes, the concept generally that you're getting at is what I mean, which is ultimately we go to warehouses.
That's a scalable business. We have a very large audience. Actually, our second largest audience is Wall Street. We have a lot of traffic to the Wall Street listeners. Thank you. What message do you have for them as it relates to the health of the Aurora business? You've been very insightful. What message do you have for our Wall Street listeners?
We try to be very transparent, right? About the business, about our product, about our path to market, about the risks ahead of us. As I mentioned earlier, we were the first company in the industry to publish our safety case. We were the first company in the industry to publish our product roadmap, right? You can go online today and see the details across several different vectors of what we're doing and when we expect to hit key milestones. That's kind of the best way I know how to provide context and confidence is through moves like this that make the path ahead of us clear and hold ourselves accountable to hitting those milestones. As I expect that as the market, so your audience on Wall Street, as they see a track record of doing everything the plan required, right, and hitting those milestones, I expect that'll build not just our credibility as a business, but hopefully, and in particular, the public trust in what we're doing.
We need public trust. You hit your milestones, Wall Street cheers. Public trust, to me, is one of the most crucial elements for the entire industry, both passenger side and truck side. I've been thinking a lot about this from the truck side. It was funny. I was actually watching an interview with Mike Wirth, the CEO of Chevron, and they required Hess. And the gentleman on Bloomberg said, please tell me we could still have the Hess truck. And it was actually written in the contract. So the Hess trucks are still going to be there because it's such a big thing at the holidays with the Hess trucks. So me being me, I had this crazy cockamamie idea. Why doesn't the industry come together and host an autonomous trucking grocery store day where everything's 20% off in that grocery store because we show the power of autonomy from a cost-saving standpoint? Am I off my rocker? What do you think? And if you think it's cool, can we see Aurora potentially do that at some point in the future?
I'm game. You're going to have a lot of stakeholders you got to get on board, but I'm game to play if you can get all of them on board. You know, the one thing that would put in high relief is something that I think many underappreciate, which is just how important trucking is to life. So few appreciate the fact that, 70+% of everything we touch has at some point been on a truck. I may be off about that statistic. I heard at one point and it sounded about right. So I was like, okay, makes sense. But yeah, even today, the volume of loads that our trucks are driving in Texas, there's a fairly high chance if you live in many of these areas of Texas, if you got a FedEx package, it was on one of our trucks. It was being pulled by one of our trucks at some point. And, this would put that in high relief if there's a sticker on everything that's like, I touched an autonomous truck.
If you bought it, a truck brought it. But how cool is the stickers? I was at ATA, I Heart Trucks. It should be I Heart Autonomous Trucks or I Heart the Aurora Driver. Start to build that trust because you're going to, I have a young daughter. You get a curious kid. Oh, Daddy, what's that? And they go to school and they talk about all their friends. You're never going to believe it. The Barbie set came on an autonomous truck. Guess what? It drove itself here. This is so cool. And then the kids start going. And that's one way to build up trust.
You've got a pitch to make and you got a lot of people to give that pitch, but I'm aboard if you can get them on board.
I got a few friends. I'm going to make a few phone calls after this. That's what I can tell you. In your opinion, what is the future of Aurora? Where are you heading?
Look, I've been involved in self-driving technology development for 16 years. The industry has never been closer than it is today. Ironically, the public discourse may never have been quite so pessimistic. And that is a really interesting inversion of expectations and reality that I think favors those who recognize it and are willing to lean into it. For Aurora, where we're going is laid out very publicly in our roadmap is we are working towards a commercial launch next year, 2024. We are aiming towards a rapid expansion of that with the strongest ecosystem of partners in the industry, from OEMs to tier ones to end customers, that we expect will be key to delivering on this mission that we started with. Right? When Drew, Chris, and I came together, it was, we got to deliver the benefits of this technology safely for sure, as quickly as we can, and as broadly as possible. And it's really exciting to me to see so many elements of the industry coming together as they have around what we've built. To see two of the top 3 OEMs consolidate around Aurora, to see the largest carriers do the same, to see this mood shift. So earlier this year, we hosted an event in Texas with the leadership team of many of our biggest customers, each of whom is performing pilots with us. And I'll be frank, the mood in that room was different than it had ever been before in any of my conversations over the last 15 years with anybody. It's really shifted from what was previously, I think, largely perceived as a nice to have, futuristic, maybe this will work someday, we should have our toe in the water, to a moment of, whoa, this is like, we got to get this ops guy involved because like it's happening. We need to iron out this element of how this product works because we never actually thought hard enough about it until now when it feels like it's so imminent that this has just got to come together. Conversations now with OEMs are no longer with leadership teams around, big picture, long-term strategy. They're with the production, manufacturing, sales, service, and support teams as we're working through, okay, how are we going to line side this? When does it enter the pilot line? How are we going to do kind of the end-of-line inspections? How are we going to crank this out into your service network? It is really tactical, and that is a palpable, to those of us deep in this industry, specifically here at Aurora, we felt this as a meaningful kind of palpable shift in sentiment that is, I think, widely, or I guess beyond the industry, not nearly as understood right now. So I think there is a bit of an inversion right now in the perception and the reality of what's happening. And I'm really excited for our launch next year, quiet though it may be, small scale though it may be, to our earlier conversation, to begin what I expect will snowball into something that ultimately someday we'll look back at this and view it as kind of the Wright brothers type moment where everything changed. And, ironically, there's so many parallels to Wright brothers, right? 9 weeks before their first flight, when the New York Times predicts it's going to take between 1 and 10 million years to achieve flight. And then 9 weeks later, here they are. It kind of feels like that right now.
It does. And I love aviation history. And I'll give you another one that I thought of when you're looking at your launch next year. It's your Charles Lindbergh Spirit of St. Louis tour. After Lindbergh went across the Atlantic in the first solo flight, there's a gentleman, Harry Guggenheim, of the Guggenheim family, funded a tour across the United States where Lindbergh fly in, he would do a parade and do a dinner and meet with individuals. Perhaps when you launch it in 24, you have a dinner or a meeting on each end, and you start to build that public trust, and you invite members of the community or the local churches to come in and do that. And then you have your Charles Lindbergh moment as your technology has its Wright brothers moment. We bring the aviation history together and make it Aurora history. Sterling, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
In particular, I guess it would be, this is an enormous opportunity for all of us. If you're involved in this industry, your business will likely be touched in some way by these trucks, by this technology. There's never been a more exciting moment, as I said, in my 16 years involved in self-driving than this one. We've never been as close to the fundamental transformation of an extraordinarily impactful industry than we are now. I look forward to participating with several of you in the delivery of that value. For those of you who we don't work with directly, I invite you to follow along as we'll try to remain as transparent as we can be about that progress and bring the public along so that we're all as excited as I am and as aware as I am of kind of the value potential, the risks, and what we're doing to mitigate those risks so it's a net benefit to society.
Autonomy is good for society. Autonomy is good for the economy. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is Aurora. Sterling, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
You bet. Thank you, Grayson.
If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed in the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices, LLC, to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.